All right. Hello and welcome to the Wikibrands Collective Webcast, the Futureproofing series. My name is Doyle Buehler, and we are the Wikibrands Collective Transformation Broadcast. We are an on-demand collective of transformation talent that is upsetting the apple cart of the professional game. This is the Futureproofing episodes of the Collective Webcast, a rundown on how to prepare your business for the future. And I'm delighted to be joined by our three guests from all around the world. So I'm pretty excited here. We have Roland Harwood. He's founder of We Are Liminal from London. We have Hjörtur Smárason, the founder of Scope Communications, and he's joining us from Copenhagen. How did I do there, Hjörtur?
Very well.
Okay, awesome.
Well done.
And we have Sean Moffitt, our regular guy he's the managing director of Wikibrands from Toronto. So excellent. We've got a worldwide class of people here. And I'm your host, Doyle Buehler, the CEO of Department of Digital. So guys, if you'd like to quickly introduce yourself, let's go, Hjörtur. Maybe you can start first.
Yeah. So hi, I'm Hjörtur. I'm from Iceland, living in Copenhagen at the moment. I run a communications agency called Scope Communications, and I've worked with a number of startups, corporation, tourism boards and governments on their future strategies.
Excellent. Thank you. And Sean?
Managing Director, Wikibrands, recovering corporate innovation nerd from years gone by. For the last 10 to 15 years, I've been doing my own thing independently, helping others see the future, act on it, and hopefully deliver good, solid returns.
And why do you call yourself a corporate nerd?
I was one at once. I mean, I'm still wearing a collared shirt today, so yeah.
And it's blue too, so that's pretty corporate.
Yeah.
Awesome. And Roland, welcome to the show as well. Tell us a bit about yourself.
Thanks, Doyle. I'm wearing a collared shirt as well, but also a innovation nerd, I guess, working in trying to develop products and services for the last 20 years in a range of different sectors. For the last 10 years through a company called 100% Open, which is an open innovation agency based in London, working in about 25 different countries. And then just a couple of months ago, exited there and set up my new venture, We Are Liminal, which is still in development, but I'm very excited about building on that innovation experience, but trying to create something new, which I'll maybe talk a little bit more about on this webcast.
Fantastic. Yeah, looking forward to hear that. And my name is Doyle Buehler. As I mentioned, I'm based out of Australia, and I run a strategic digital consultancy, Department of Digital, on digital transformation. So today we're talking about future proofing.
Doyle, if I just may interrupt, I'm not hearing Roland at all.
Oh, okay. I can hear him okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you and Sean fine, but I can't hear Roland.
Okay. All right.
This might be Brexit happening right in front of our eyes here, where the two European guys can't hear. The rest of the world can hear you both well.
Yeah, but there seems to be a divide between us.
Yeah,
really?
Sorry to hear that.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll see what we can do, and if we can't fix the tech, then Hjörtur, you'll just have to guess what Roland is saying. So.
Yeah.
Maybe paraphrase, do reverse translation, whatever Roland says. Maybe.
I'll assume that he speaks in the way that Theresa May is speaking at the moment. Would that be correct, Roland?
Yeah, cool. So let's talk future proofing. Sean, you want to start?
Yeah, I mean, I'm excited based on the caliber of our guests today, but also what we're doing. This is very here and now. We've produced a research effort that is quite intensive. There's about 10 of us that have been working on in the background in terms of both a quantitative survey that we'll post here, but also doing interviews of some of the best innovators in the world. And so I thought maybe it's an opportune time to get people together before we actually get the results and kind of ponder what we think we're going to learn. And I think there is a presentation out there that has 50 questions that we decided to answer with our corporate innovation playbook research, and maybe we can tackle some of the meatier ones today on this webcast.
Excellent. And what are we going to learn with the survey? Like, what's the purpose of this?
I think, and I'm happy to give the conch over to the other guys in terms of their interest in doing it. But I love Sharon McIntyre, who's part of our research effort. She said, you know what, there's a ton of work out there in terms of innovation models, in terms of academic studies about innovation, but our real interest here, I think, is finding out what's going on out there in the real world. So kind of her term was innovation in the wild, which I just love as a shorthand moniker in terms of what we're trying to do with this effort here. And you've got, you know, all four of us are practitioners who are probably closer to the, you know, how do we plan and execute it inside companies as opposed to just looking at it from a distance, kind of subjectively or objectively. So yeah, that's my interest. I'm happy to field it over to the other two guys in terms of their interest.
What's innovation in the wild, Roland? Do you see that over in your parts of the world? And what does it look like?
I think it. Where do I start? So we're in the middle of this kind of big Brexit debate happening in the UK, which is you know, providing some wider context. Nobody really knows which way it's going to go, but I think that's an interesting parallel as well. What's happening in many companies and organizations as well. You know, we live in this incredibly connected world, and that connectivity is fantastic, but what that generates is complexity and uncertainty. And the mistake that I see being made is people then just spiral into analysis and more analysis, and that leads to paralysis and decline. Whereas I think the way out of that, and the more progressive companies that I'm working with, are experimenting with different innovation models, design thinking, prototyping, whatever it might be, and really try and, in a more agile way, experiment, iterate their way out of uncertainty to develop new products and services or define and create their futures. So I think we're living through an interesting time where we're adjusting our business models and our political models and our societal models as well to kind of respond really to this incredibly hyper-connected world that we live in. And I'm very energized by that, but I also think there's no single silver bullet to navigate our way out. We all need to figure out what's the right way forward as individuals and as organizations as well.
Yeah, cool. And hopefully the survey will give some of that instructions. Hjörtur, what's innovation like where you're at and what you're seeing in the industry?
Well, I think innovation has always been very exciting and an important part for corporations, but I don't think it has been as challenging as it is now, except maybe back in the 1890s. You know, when we were inventing the cars and the telephone and all that. Because we have so many new forces at play that are disrupting the markets. And what I think is maybe scary now is that we have all those theories on how to do innovation. We have companies that are really ambitious, that have a fantastic track record of innovation, have a very powerful R&D department, and yet they fail. And I think that's the interesting part, you know, why is it that some companies who seem to be doing everything right according to the book are still failing and others are succeeding that are maybe not doing things by the book? What is it that makes the difference? And I hope that we might be able to find some of those nuances in our research. You know, what is it that makes this difference? And what is it that companies have to be aware of so they don't fall into those traps like, well, we all know Nokia and Kodak, who were big companies that completely collapsed. So yeah, I really look forward to see the results of our research and what lessons we can draw from those who are really succeeding today.
Yeah. Do you think that there's any sort of methods of innovation that might work better, certain types of ways of implementing it? Like what are your views on that?
Well, I think the important part is the context of your innovation, because you can do your innovation completely correct, but it has to be in the context of the trends. You know, where are the trends going? Are we following the trends, or are we just building up on our own production capabilities and tradition and history? So I think maybe that's the tricky part, that you need to think your innovation in a very broad context not only your own customers, but the general trends out there and the new technologies that are coming in, and how you can embrace those technologies instead of seeing them as a threat and trying to compete with them.
Yeah, great point. So Sean, in terms of the survey itself, this is sort of like an ongoing thing, correct?
Well, I think the effort's going to be ongoing. We're probably in a very concentrated 2-month window right now in terms of interviewing some of the best in the world and having our surveys that are public and open. So if you have a latent interest in innovation, you can certainly take both surveys. And there's so many good questions to ask. We've bucketed 2 different surveys, one focused on current practices and the other one focused on future predictions and bets, just because there's just way too much. Maybe it's because when we get 10 smart people in a room, we all kind of can converge on just like the essential 15 questions. So we're asking about 50 of them instead. So, but yeah, like innovation, there's no, I don't know, maybe that's a metaphor for a discussion, but I don't think innovation has a finish line, does it?
Well, I don't know. Could it? Do you have to innovate for innovation purposes, just for the sake of innovating?
Well, we've all seen, I guess there's a term out there now that's ascribed to a lot of corporate labs and stuff called innovation theater, and people usually put the air quotes on there. I'm not too sure. Maybe I'll throw one of the big questions we're looking at is just how good are companies doing this? Because I just mentioned a stat to the guys off camera about executive boards believe that innovation as a practice, if you look at a company doing 23 things, like that's the core composite of what a company does, innovation was ranked 17th, which is hardly, a passing grade in terms of innovation. Maybe, getting some consensus in terms of where's it all going wrong? Why 17 versus somewhere in at least the single digits?
Yeah, no, that sounds good. And in terms of the actual survey, so you've sort of created, just so I understand this correctly, 32 problems that you've sort of presented in terms of how do businesses overcome things. Could you explain those a little bit?
Yeah, I think there's some things that people just take for granted, that of course we want to put the lean startup in the enterprise. That's the fashionable thing to say right nowadays. But is that necessarily the case? Is that what we're doing? Is that what the heads of innovation of big companies think? And I think certainly in some of the discussions I've had already, there's not full consensus on that. There are some inherent advantages of a corporation that's big and global that startups don't have, and considerations that need to be made. So I think trying to figure out, one great case is just how to define innovation in the first place, and whether or not what you're truly doing is incremental, we're launching a new flavor of something, versus no, we're completely changing the business model and competency of our company. So are you, my old company P&G and we're just launching the next flavor of Crest, or are you Netflix and changing every 5 years the way you go to work? So yeah, I'm really curious to know what's the percentage that people think they're allocating toward kind of what we classically called Horizon 1, 2, and 3. I'll throw it to you guys in terms of what you think we'll expect and what might be the panacea perhaps.
Yeah, cool. Roland, do you want to take that?
Sure, yeah. So, I mean, Horizon 1, 2, and 3 is kind of short, medium, long term, right? I think, I don't know if you may disagree with this, but I think there's not enough people looking at Horizon 0, which is the here and now. So what can we do in this moment to make a positive change in the right kind of direction? I think there's too much procrastination in organizations commissioning research, even startup accelerators, or things that require significant investment, but it kind of it kicks the problem down the line. And I think there's not enough responsibility being taken at a senior level or right throughout the levels of an organization to really embrace the change that is required and necessary. To one of the previous points you mentioned, Doyle, I think innovation is change is a constant in our world, and so innovation has to be a kind of continuous response to that. It can't just be something that you commission every 3 years and forget about.
Yeah.
And Sean, you talked about the kind of league tables and how do we get into the top 10 or something of CEO priorities. I saw a report recently that there are lots of conflicting reports, and hopefully this new study will shed some light on it. But the statistics I saw were that 97% of CEOs say that innovation is a top priority, but 94% of them are dissatisfied with their current innovation program. So even if those numbers are only vaguely correct, I think it shows that there's something deeply wrong, and innovation has been a thing within corporations for more than a decade. And I think we're going through a transition kind of globally, societally, politically, but also within organizations around how they do change, how they do innovation. And this is fascinating to me because it's kind of my professional world, but it's also, I think, really, really important, because I think the role that companies play in tackling commercial challenges, of course, but the role they play kind of to make the world better fundamentally is very much in question, and something that I think is changing. So a few different points there, but I think for now we need a bit more Horizon Zero thinking. Of course, we need Horizon 1, 2, and 3 as well, but I think I would perhaps present an alternative, which is focus a bit more on the here and now as well.
But just maybe it's a rhetorical question, but if you're talking now, is that actual innovation? Because isn't innovation about something that we're getting to?
Well, I would argue that it is, because the only place where you can affect change is in yourself and in this moment. But of course, you need to have a view to where you're going and what you're creating. And so I don't want to suggest that you don't need to think about the future and create the future and invest in the future. Of course you do. But I think some of the reasons why 94% of CEOs are dissatisfied with their current innovation programs is because they're just not delivering results. They're too seduced by some utopian future that we may be creating, or fearful of some dystopian future that we might be heading towards. And either way, they're too paralyzed by the future. And so it needs some bravery and some action in the here and now. That's what I think.
Perfect. Hjörtur, what do you think? How do we get better at innovating? How do we get better at companies innovating?
Well, I'm going to have to agree with Roland on this one. No, I'm just kidding. I didn't hear anything he said. John was just nodding a lot, so it looked like it made sense.
You're doing a great job of nodding.
I think there's been a lot of focus lately on Silicon Valley. In the last 20 years, everyone has been talking about Silicon Valley and the startups that are coming up from there, and the garage innovation way of doing things, the lean startups and the flexibility they have. And then the challenges of integrating those dynamics into the corporation. Guy Kawasaki used to write a lot about how Apple decided to put a team out in a garage outside of the corporate headquarters to try to get that startup spirit. And I find it interesting to see. I think there are pros and cons always. The startups tend to be very out of the box, but maybe lack focus and lack resources, while the corporations have very heavy processes and they have a hard time deviating from those, which can be very counterproductive when it comes to innovation and thinking out of the box. But one of the things that I find interesting is to see how some corporations are starting to send out small teams and put them into co-working spaces with startups to create a different kind of dynamics, different kind of interactions, maybe a better feel of what's happening on the ground. Put your ear to the tracks to try to hear what's coming and what's brewing. And so I find it interesting to see how these dynamics are at play in corporate innovations and how corporations are trying to approach these different methods to improve their innovation and be future-proofed.
So are they hoping that the startup mentality rubs off on them?
Well, not necessarily. Well, that's one of the things, but I think it's more that when you're within the corporations, you tend to run into the same ideas everywhere because you're in the same environment. But when you're in the co-working space, you have a very different kind of people around you with different perspectives and different ideas. And bumping into these perspectives may ignite new ideas and new possibilities for development than when you're just within your locked environment within the corporation. And I think that's what people are really trying to get. It's bumping into those different perspectives to further fuel their innovation.
The stimulus, yeah.
Yes, precisely.
Excellent. Thank you. So Sean, just quickly here, we're getting close to running out of time, but what is the number one problem in terms of innovating in sort of the corporate side of things?
Big question. I'm, you know what, that may even be above my pay grade in terms of just identifying it. I think that's one of the reasons why we've gone out to learn it from others.
Okay.
If I was to hypothesize and say what was probably way up the list, I think there is this strident belief in large companies that innovation is what happens over there. That's their department's role, or that's IT's role because we're dealing with technology. Unlike a startup where pretty much if you've got 20 people together, that's all they do. They're all united to survive to tomorrow and hopefully, innovate their way out of whatever box, small box that they're in. In a company, you can insulate yourself from that for a period of time, and certainly your job or your function. I ran across a stat the other day that said in the majority of cases when meetings are called real live physical meetings, people are opening up their smartphones, dealing with stuff that isn't focused on the meeting they're in. And one of the biggest beliefs was their opinion really doesn't matter in that meeting, which suggests that they're not empowered. Whatever they're going to come up with is not going to push the innovation agenda of that company further. So I think in a long-winded way, I'd say one of the big things is you've got companies of more than multiple thousands of people. There is this ostrich head in the sand kind of viewpoint that, the 2% of the world, the senior executive team and those innovators over there are going to be doing it. And I think that's their problem. And I think that's leadership's problem in terms of creating better forms within their companies to create an organizational-wide innovation agenda. Great.
No, it's good to know. And Roland, yourself, what do you think is the number one problem preventing innovation in the corporate world? I think you did touch on some of it earlier too. So
I did. Well, if it's okay, I'd like to maybe reframe a problem as an opportunity.
Sure.
And to, I think just to agree with Hjörtur, I know he can't hear me, but he was saying it's important to get the kind of clash of ideas.
Roland said he agrees with you.
Very good. It's good we're on the same page, Roland.
He was talking about what I would call open innovation, which is getting external ideas from startups or whoever to kind of inspire new ideas.
That is a pretty cool concept.
Agree with that. But I think the biggest opportunity for corporate innovators these days it comes from inside. Actually, there's some recent research that shows that millennials are setting up fewer startups than they were even just 5 years ago. More people moving into corporates, but what that generation doesn't want to do is just work for a company that is not making a positive difference on the world. And so I think the biggest driver of innovation, certainly within large companies, again, will be harnessing that creativity and entrepreneurial kind of spirit and desire to have a positive impact on the world that comes from their employees. Paul Polman, the chief executive of Unilever, very controversially, or recently stepped down, but very controversially said that you can save more lives working for Unilever than any NGO on the planet. And that's been torn apart in some articles dissecting that statement. But I think there is something interesting in that about the role that these bigger companies can play in the world and how you can really harness the employee base, which in most organizations is sadly disengaged. So that's the opportunity, but there's a lot of work that still needs to be done in that space.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like it. So Sean, can you take us through? I've got the links here. We have bit.ly/InnoPlaybook A. So you said there's 2 surveys, right? What's the difference?
One's focused on current practices, just what's going on now, and one's focused on kind of this undetermined future and just what people's predictions and bets are.
Fantastic. So that's A and B there. And then they can actually, what's the research link? Innovation Playbook?
I believe wiki-brands.com /innovation playbook. I think we've got it there on screen. And it'll give you some more insight in terms of who's behind the research, what we're using it for, what questions we're trying to answer, and maybe some context behind what we're doing. We plan on having this research all put to bed in March. We'll have a great report, and my hope is the two gentlemen and yourself, Doyle, will be back again here in March to kind of dispute, debate, internalize, wrangle about the results that come back from this stuff.
Fantastic. Yeah, looking forward to that. Excellent. So any last words on innovation? Hjörtur, do you want to last 30 seconds?
Yeah, you were asking about what the main challenge is within the corporation.
Yeah, a challenge or an opportunity, yeah.
Yeah, well, I think the biggest challenge is the board, the managing board, because my experience is that I'm often asked to come into a corporation because I have a reputation of, well, let's say brave ideas, and they ask me to really challenge them. So I go through, I look at the concepts and what we're working with, and then I bring some brave ideas and really challenge them, and then they back out. No, we can't do that. We've never done anything like that. We really know what we're doing. We have a lot at stake here. We have high value assets that we don't want to risk. So we'll just go with the safe way like we've always done. And many of the corporations have all the new ideas and the technologies they need to conquer the future, but it stops at the board because they're afraid of it, and it's uncomfortable. They have a lot of responsibility, and they don't want to screw it up. So they become risk averse.
So be more brave then.
Yes, precisely. You have to.
Spoken like a true Viking.
Yes.
Be more brave. All right, Roland, any closing comments?
Yeah, I would say that the biggest and most important challenges transcend any single organization. And so I think we need to be working between large and small organizations, between for-profit and not-for-profit. So I guess my call to action in early 2019 is to go to the edges, the boundaries, the seams of your organizations, and that's where innovation comes from. As J.G. Ballard once said, the future reveals itself in the peripheral. So I think we all need better peripheral vision and see what's coming up, and that's where things like this webcast can really help. Nice,
cool, appreciate that. Sean, final word.
God, I love that quote. Man, yeah. I came to this discussion with quoteless, so I don't know if I can match that kind of amazing contextual reference there, but I will give both these guys some plaudits in terms of I'd love the whole Horizon Zero, and my interpretation of that is innovation is habit as opposed to something that you do. Like we're sitting here on January 16th or 17th, and everybody's got their New Year's resolutions that they're about to break up with. And I think, I think sociologists have said it's like so much better just to say this is what I'm going to do this week as opposed to this year. And I think if you use that as a metaphor for innovation, it's like stop making resolutions about innovation and start changing what you're doing tomorrow as a habit. So there's just way too much wealth and way too much chaos happening out there. I feel some level of empathy from my corporate brethren in terms of just changing the needle on this game that I think it's a worthwhile investment of our time.
Excellent. Yeah. So take the survey and then it'll help you get pointed in the right direction.
Please. Yeah.
Excellent. Cool. So thank you so much. Really appreciate your time, gentlemen. Thanks everybody for joining the Wikibrands Collective webcast, the Futureproofing series. Go to wiki-brands.com/webcast to see some of the previous episodes and also catch up on this one. And we might even have a transcript too. Thank you, Roland and Hjörtur, for joining us, as well as Sean. And I'm your host, Doyle Buehler, and we have some amazing shows coming up as well. So keep an eye on the Wikibrands Collective webcast. If you learned something, please like and share, or simply ask us a question in the comments below, and we'll respond as quickly as possible. Thank you, everybody, and have a great evening, a great day, and a great morning. We'll see you online.
Thank you.